No, está bien.
Maybe, is it possible to make it a little bit smaller?
Smaller?
Because so we see a little bit more of them.
There?
Yeah, maybe even a little bit more small. I think
That's good.
yeah.
Oh, you can make it smaller.
Yeah, I think that for this page it will work when it's smaller. Because it's very big things.
Bom, muito boa tarde a todos.
Boa tarde.
Vamos começar mais um evento do primeiro encontro de pesquisa em performance musical da UFSJ. Nós temos aqui hoje um convidado muito especial, que já é nosso amigo e colaborador há vários anos, né? Já é a quarta vez do Anders, professor doutor Anders Chapelon, da Universidade de Suécia. fazer hoje aqui é dar uma atenção maior para os aspectos metodológicos, né, de forma que seja de uso de todos e não vire um seminário de flauta.
So the key text
Então, o texto-chave
is a Principe from 1707 by Jacques Le Romain. And this key text is the first document that in depth describes how to play on a transverse flute within the Western tradition. When I have traveled in Far East Asia, Japan, and Korea, there are, as a matter of fact, treatises which are very much in depth regarding transverse flute use in Korea and Japan from the Middle Age. They're very detailed. But in the Western tradition, if I may say so, Haute de Terre is the first text. We have texts from the Renaissance, late 17th century, 16th century, late 16th century. We have some things, but they are not comparable on the detail level.
Então, o texto que ele está trabalhando é o livro do Haute de Terre, né, do Haute de Terre Le Roman, né, que é o livro de 707, com a tradução, né, de 729, né, e é os rudimentos, os princípios da chamada flauta alemã, né, que é a flauta transversal, né. Na verdade, a primeira fonte que a gente tem de como tocar o instrumento, né, no mundo ocidental. No mundo oriental, como ele falou, tem vários outros, muito detalhados. Aí tem também, antes, né, no Renascimento, tem alguma coisa também, mas não é com esse detalhe. A gente falava do Pretório, mas tem esse detalhe, mas com esse nível de detalhamento é o do Haute de Terre.
And as you can see here on the screen,
Vocês podem ver lá, né?
there we have Principe 1707 by Haute de Terre. This text is very well known.
É um texto muito conhecido entre os flautistas.
So that is nothing new to bring that text up to the line. That's a well-known text. It's easy to find facsimiles. There are some translations made in German. There is a German, as a modern time, there is a German translation made a couple of years ago on the complete work dealing with the traverso. And we have some English translations from the 1960s. There are Dutch translations from the 18th century. So this text is a well-known text, the original, also the French text in some translations.
Sim, estou dizendo que é um texto bastante conhecido, né? Existem traduções, é possível acessar esse texto em PDF. I think IBM,
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
In French, na PDF. Right? Então, assim, você pode achar, né, em qualquer lugar na internet, e é um texto bastante conhecido, bastante traduzido.
So then, and it should also be said that this text by Haute de Terre discusses 3 different instruments.
Então, o texto do Haute de Terre discute 3 diferentes instrumentos.
Also flûte traversière ou flûte allemande, as it was called in the 18th century.
A flauta alemã, né, que é a flauta transversal.
Recorder,
a flauta doce, que é a flauta
and oboe.
E o oboe.
But the treatise is for the text dealing with the recorder is much shorter than what is about the traverso, and the oboe text is very short and mainly fingering charts with very few chords.
Só está dizendo que o texto que lida com a flauta doce é bem pequeno em relação ao que lida com a flauta alemã, né? E o texto do oboé é mais curto ainda, basicamente com dedicados.
So the key text is about the flute traversière. That is the important text.
Então o texto-chave aí é o texto do traverso, né, da flauta traversière.
So then, interestingly enough, there is an English translation made 1729.
Então, de forma interessante, tem uma tradução feita em 1729.
And this text from 1729 is only left over to our time in maybe 3 copies.
Então, essa tradução de 1729, sobraram só 3 cópias dela.
What is also quite surprising is that there are no facsimiles of this text.
E surpreendentemente, não há facsímiles dos textos, né? Edições facsímiles, né? que é aquela edição que você faz ela copiada do que é o texto original.
And as written on the frontispiece of the English translation of 1729,
Tá escrito no prefácio da...
literally is written, faithfully translated from the French.
Aí tá descrito na tradução para o inglês de 1729, que é assim, tradução literal, né? Tradução literal do francês. Faithful, não é literal, é tradução fiel.
And if you can understand both language, the early 18th century French and early 18th century English, it's correct. It is faithfully translated. That is very, very close, the English translation. Then, what is so interesting is, why was not that brought to light in a facsimile? So that is one of my points of departure for this work, to make this text available for everybody, because not everybody can read French. Of course not.
Why should? Dizer assim, por que não foi feito um facsímile até hoje da English version, não é? Por que não foi feito um facsímile até hoje da versão em inglês?
And I think that's very important to get access to this material, and especially when it is a kind of text, as a key text. And I will try to explain a little bit later why it is so important. But that is one of my point of departures. And to put it very briefly, what I do is it will come a facsimile. This text is not long, maybe 30 pages or so. There will be a facsimile that you put in the book. But there will also be a synoptical version that you have the whole French text on the left side and the corresponding passages of the English text. So you can compare them, cross.
Então ele está falando que na publicação que ele vai fazer, que ele vai fazer uma versão comparativa das duas. Você pode olhar a versão em francês de um lado e a versão do inglês do outro.
And also an important statement is to say that early 18th century French is in a sense easier to read than modern French.
Eu estou falando que o inglês do início do século XVIII, o francês do início do século XVIII, é mais fácil de ler do que o francês moderno.
So if you understand modern French, you can read this text without any problem at all. And the same is with the English text. If you can read a little bit more advanced English, early 18th century English is not difficult. It's not Shakespeare English. 100 years old.
Está falando que você entende um pouco de inglês também é fácil de ler o inglês do início do século XVIII. Não é nada parecido com Shakespeare.
So therefore,
inglês normal, you can just read it.
Yeah. So therefore, it's important also to say that it is not necessary to make a word list, or so to speak, to explain the French text or explain the English text from a language point of view. That's not necessary.
Então está dizendo que não é preciso assim de uma versão que seja explicativa da língua, né? Como a gente vê, por exemplo, no Camões, né? Camões, para você ler Camões, tem sempre explicação. Então você pode usar o próprio texto original, que é possível de entender com a língua, né?
So there you have the basic outline to make the English translation from 1729 accessible for everybody that have interest, and then
está dizendo que então uma das
and make it in a facsimile, and also that so you can really study the text, and also at the same time being able to compare it with the French original. And there are some small differences.
Então falando que objetivo inicial é tornar disponível o texto em inglês e sua comparação ao texto francês.
But there are no essential differences, and let me give you an example of a difference. In the French version, there is
exemplo da diferença.
In the beginning of the book, Oteta suggests if you want to know more and learn more, you can come and visit me and have private lessons.
O Oteta fala no início, né, que você that's on the French version, right?
Yes, in the French version.
O Oteta fala assim, se você quiser saber mais que aquilo, você pode visitar ele e ter uma aula particular com ele.
So it was a way to advertise for private lessons. And the section like that is omitted in the English version. So there is no advertisement for private lessons.
Na versão inglesa ele não faz a propaganda da aula particular dele.
So, as it is written on the frontispiece of the English translation, 1729, it is indeed faithfully translated, and there are very few mistakes There are some small mistakes in the fingering charts, which is not so interesting today, I think, but which I think is mainly misprints.
Então está dizendo que a fidelidade à tradução é de fato, não sei se você sabe, mas ele é fluente nessas duas línguas aí, do francês e do inglês.
Then is the question how you can continue and make a research project out of this, to make commentaries and to discuss the text and put it in contexts.
Então, ele fala assim, como você faz um projeto de pesquisa a respeito disso, né? Você usa o texto e coloca em contexto, né? That comes the methodology.
Yes, and
I may have a problem.
maybe it's a problem there. It's no problem. So I can then read what is on the front page of my book. It is a...
O controle aqui, acho que você consegue procurar a fonte de novo.
A fonte de novo? Hold on,
Okay.
Vai para mim. Computador, vai.
Okay.
Isso. Desativar.
You know what I used to say often is when they ask me if I not here because
Yes.
now we impress a little bit, but in big word conferences, then they come up to you and say, "What do you need for technical equipment?" I say, "I use a Greek method." My voice. They get a little bit disappointed in technical stuff as I don't need anything.
Acho que foi agora. Vai na academia.
The Greek method from that differently. And I think that is, we can joke about it, but it's quite important also. We have all seen presentations with incredibly many things there, and someone talks at the same time, and there are different things, and you're just confused. That's quite funny. But I think I can read, everybody will understand, just so we know the structure of the thing.
Yes.
So this is a comparative study.
Então é um estudo comparativo. Metodologicamente, é um estudo comparativo.
Of French flute traditions in plural. There is not one French flute
Então,
tradition.
das tradições francesas de flauta. Das tradições.
And it has a span over 300 years.
E tem período, né, de consideração da pesquisa que é de 300 anos. 1700? 1700 to 2000, right?
Yeah, we can say from 1707 up to about year 2000.
Ok, de 1707 até o ano 2000, a pesquisa dele.
So that's basically 300 years. And having then this key text by Auditeur as a point of departure,
Então, tendo o texto Roteter como ponto de início,
I will discuss transitions of aesthetics.
então ele vai discutir as transições de estética.
Transition of musical expression, playing techniques,
A transição de expressão musical, de técnicas de tocar,
and flutistic learning regarding the traverso, the multi-key conical flute, the ringklappenflute, and the boomflutes. So it covers basically all used transverse flutes within the Western tradition since around late 17th century up to the present day, and that's basically 4 different kinds of flutes.
Então, assim, além dessas 3 coisas que eu disse aqui, um outro parâmetro é o aprendizado do instrumento, né? Cobrindo aí as transformações do instrumento, que são 4 instrumentos diferentes, né? Que é o instrumento roteter, depois o instrumento com 5 chaves, depois o instrumento que veio antes do drum e o drum, que é o instrumento que a gente usa.
I don't know, can we get something on the screen or is it difficult?
Eu vou tirar e colocar esse daqui.
We can see, because what I would like to show would be the contents. And that is on the document B, and the contents is quite interesting to see. Because then we can discuss the construction of the scientific work.
Control, né? Control F5.
Alguns vocês têm que ir direto para
É porque abre aquele negocinho aqui, né? Ou não, vai. Aí, duplicar, né?
muito depois, né?
Desse aqui.
If you want, I can just...
If it doesn't work, it's okay. I can tell it.
Estender. Posso até estender.
Mas uma função do
Parece que estender deu. Duplicar.
You see the great method?
Yes, group method. It's better.
They already knew 2,500 years ago.
Yes, it's sometimes tricky.
It's not even conservative to say.
Let me do like this.
No,
Let me do like this.
I agree with
I'll
you.
get this screen.
No, but I can also tell. We can use the Greek method.
Se você colocar a tela aqui.
Eu coloco a tela aqui, gente, ó. Aí a gente vai junto, mas o problema é que eu vou ficar na frente com você. Mas essa ainda sim.
Okay, then I will tell it in words. So what I wanted to show with the contents is that with the contents we very clearly see the structure of how the research is made and how the research had progressed within the research process. So obviously,
como é que chama, com o índice, né, com os conteúdos do índice, dá para entender como que a pesquisa é feita, né, como que ela progride metodologicamente.
so obviously it starts with an introduction, and the introduction, so to speak, puts all cards on the table. It starts with the first announcement of the French edition, in Mercure de France and Mercure Galant magazines from the period. And then I think I can say that. Then it goes to a short comment on principe. I always use the name principe. And then the English translation is rudiments. And then a short comment, how could this text have been used? And it's not a method, it's a manual more. Now that's an interesting statement.
Hold on, just
Just to say the next. And then I discussed different models of transverse routes, because I double check all my research with 6, 7, 8 different models of transverse routes of the 18th century. And finally, a short discussion on the concept of souplesse in goût, as a goût taste. So that is the introduction.
How do you translate souplesse to English?
Suppleness in English.
Suppleness.
Yeah.
Suppleness in English. Então, falando que a introdução do trabalho dele, aí entrando como que ele organizou, né, como que ele está organizando a pesquisa dele. Primeiro, ele apresenta como se fosse um projeto de pesquisa mesmo, né, o design da pesquisa, né, e as considerações metodológicas, né. Depois ele fala da fonte em si, né, princípios e rudimentos, né, e ele coloca uma coisa muito interessante aqui, que não é um método, mas é um manual de estudo próprio, diferente. Manual e método são duas coisas diferentes, né? Muito confundidas, né? Depois ele fala dos modelos diferentes de instrumento que vão ser considerados como parâmetros dentro da pesquisa, né? E depois, no final, os conceitos de superness e goat. Goat is like flavor, right?
Taste more.
Taste,
Yeah.
né? É gosto, gente, mas não sei.
Gosto
Musical.
Gosto,
Gosto, né? Seria isso.
So that is the introduction. I try to put the cards on the table. Second step is,
Então, ele falou que é hora de colocar, né, as cartas na mesa, a introdução.
and the second step is then called Jacques Auditeur le Roumain. And this has 2 sections. The first section is the court musician. The second section of that chapter is composer, author, teacher. The interest is we don't know very much about these musicians from the late 17th century and early 18th century. So it's not at all an attempt to make a biography of Hotteterre, not at all. This section, because we don't know very much. I don't know which house he lived in Paris, it still exists, but this is kind of an anecdotal thing. Apart from that, he was quite wealthy to have such a big house in Paris. But the interesting thing is, what did he represent in his period? He was a court musician, he was a composer, he was an author, and he was a teacher. And that is more objective facts. That's it. No speculation about who he liked or disliked. So that's not of interest here.
Ok. Então, e agora ele apresenta, né, o Jacques Hotteterre romano, né, e o que ele era como músico para a sociedade, né? Ele era um músico da corte, né? Era compositor, autor, né, do livro que ele escreveu, né? E também professor, né? Então, falou que ele não considerou aqui questões da vida do cara que ninguém sabe, na verdade, que nem são importantes para o trabalho, mas considera, sim, o que é pertinente à pesquisa, que é a atuação do Hotteterre como músico, né? This is all like bring to context, right?
Yes, also that's the cars. Who was he?
Yes.
In the sense, as a professional man,
Right.
what did he do? But with whom he was married, we know that. That is to speculate. It's not of so great interest here. Apart from he married a wealthy young woman, and her father had a very good job at the French court. So he came in an economical, very good situation. But here we are talking about his text, principe, and the translation. So we don't blur the focus for the study. We must make limitations.
Então, nesse momento da pesquisa, ele ainda está mostrando o objeto de pesquisa. Ele está trazendo, está contextualizando o objeto de pesquisa dele, né, de uma forma mais ampla, né? Então, ele está mostrando quem é o Jacques Hotteterre romano como músico, né, o fazer musical dele.
And then the last section of the introduction is the different translations. So the different English translations, the German translations, the Dutch translation. So now the reader of the book have the cards. This is what the material we have.
Então agora ele fala da questão das traduções que existem, né? Então, até esse momento, que é o número 3 aqui, ó, o leitor, ele entende quais são os elementos da pesquisa. Então, né, é uma coisa que vocês vão ter que fazer muito, né? É mostrar para o seu interlocutor, para o leitor, quais são os elementos da sua pesquisa, o que é que você está pesquisando, qual é o tamanho da sua delimitação, né? O seu escopo, a palavra é escopo, né? É o escopo da pesquisa.
So now when the reader have read these 3 sections, we are ready to look at the text.
Então, depois que a pessoa leu esses três subitens, esses 3 itens, eles estão prontos, então, para entrar para o texto em si, que é o texto central da pesquisa.
So the 4th section is then, as I said, the synoptical edition. You have the French and you have the English text. And you study the text yourself.
Yes. Então, aí ele falou que ele fez o capítulo 4, é simplesmente os 2 textos, um ao lado do outro, para que o próprio leitor possa comparar os 2 textos, o original em francês e a tradução em inglês, né? Contemporânea.
Exactly. And the continuation is then, when the reader have had these first 3 sections, you have the complete text in 2 languages. Now I start to take out essential things from the text and discuss important phenomena described in the text in relation to the French context in the beginning of the 18th century. It's not so many things at the sides, but then I relate to, for example, rhetorics, to theater, methods, books on dance.
Aqui da Jessica Tess.
Yeah.
Então agora ele começa a pensar coisas que são interessantes do texto do Hotteterre e relacionar com outras coisas que estão ali no momento, né? Então, ele relaciona coisas que conteúdos que ele pensa no texto, como seja lá o que for, com retórica, né? Com métodos de dança, what was the other one you said? Like
It's dance, rhetorics, singing, acting, manners, good manners.
Com canto, com atuação como ator e com maneiras de se comportar. Tudo isso está ali embutido dentro de um contexto que o cara escreveu o manual. Entendeu? Então ele contextualiza um conteúdo de dentro do método com todo esse conteúdo que regia, que estava na vida das pessoas ali em volta.
And a good example is then an important concept of the time is what we call in French language bonne grâce.
Então, um importante conceito que as pessoas viviam naquela época na França, no início do século XVIII, é um conceito que se chama bonne grâce.
And that grâce, in this sense, is not connected to the religious.
Não é conectado à graça religiosa, mas é a graça do.
So it's of the body. That you can say an example that when you play the flute, it should be a delight for the eyes. So you must have a beautiful position while playing, and it should also be something for the ears, both things. And then when I do this, there is a position when you stand up, the contrapposto in Italian, the enchaînement. Like when you play the flute, you don't stand like that. You stand like this. Left foot a little bit, because that also has to do with that asymmetrical position. But this position here is a traditional position in rhetorics, or in theater, or an opera singer. And we can't see it there, but I'm sure you have seen photos of Michelangelo's in Davido.
David e Michelangelo tem essa mesma posição.
Let
me translate this.
Yeah.
É porque o conceito de boa graça, né, bonne grâce, né, é um conceito que vinha para a própria comunicação da pessoa, do corpo da pessoa socialmente, né?
É a graça do ser.
A graça do ser. Do you know that in Portuguese you can ask for someone like, what's your grace? What's your grace? Your grace is I'm others, I'm blind. That's the same thing. Maybe.
Of course it is.
Right? Então, assim, falando que, assim, por exemplo, para um flautista naquela época, se deveria agradar a pessoa com que ela escutasse, mas também com que ela pudesse ver. Seria a posição, e aí a posição do bonne grâce, que é essa posição que ele mostrou ali, ela está em muitas coisas, inclusive nas esculturas do Michelangelo.
And that is a key information, that you must have this kind of grace, which should be attractive in many different ways. And then for the flute, it happens to be, if you play the flute on this side, this is the normal position. If you will play the flute like that, then you have this position, so you don't twist your back and things like that. And then I give examples with Michelangelo. Yes, please. Yeah. I thought you were okay. And then this bonne grâce, exactly as Tonino just said, I connect it to books on how to dance, and that is the first dance position.
Então, com esse conceito de bonne grâce, ele conecta o método do cara com a dança.
And then that is an example of how I bring out the sections from Baudelaire when he describes how to stand, how to hold your arms, how to hold your hands. There is also engraving, which is very instructive. That is not an illustration, it's an instructive picture, as if the person would stand in front of you.
Então, ele conecta com esse conceito, ele conecta da forma que o Roteter mostra a posição de tocar. Ou seja, a posição de tocar não está só ligada ali naquele caso com a posição para fazer o corpo funcionar enquanto toca, mas com uma coisa maior que estava ali, que era a própria comunicação da pessoa com, né, a forma de usar o corpo, né? Ele sabe que está também nos santos das nossas igrejas aqui, ó. Aquele joelho que aparece na escultura está ali, né? We have like the sculpture of saints here in our church.
Yes.
The same position is there.
Of course.
Like one foot is like ahead of the other one, and then you can see the knee coming out from the.
Absolutely.
Né? Tá exatamente nessa.
And that is we can't look at this as a text, a very instructive manual on how to play on a transverse flute. It is, of course, having a context.
Então, assim,
and Baudelaire or that could have been another author, they relate to the context because that makes it more easy to understand the text.
And that's when he lived too, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that is important to say, Tonino. Exactly. Good. That the texts that I relate to dance, theater, grammar, are all texts which are contemporary with Principe. So it's not that I take out the text from late 19th century, late 19th century to discuss how to position yourself when you dance.
Ok.
Not at all. It's a text that, if Auteuil is 1707, maybe the dance text was 1721. So it covers the same period.
Então ele está falando que os textos que ele procura, que são textos relacionados ao método, né, da dança e tudo, eles são textos contemporâneos, né? E nos textos contemporâneos, por exemplo, da dança, tem questões que são similares, né? Que não daria para pegar um texto, né, por exemplo, do final do século XIX, para falar do Roteter ensinando posição lá no início do século XVIII. Então, que é um contexto que está ali acontecendo no entorno, né?
Another example, which is very complicated, is intonation and the concept of temperaments. So they simply how you organize intervals.
Ele falou que é uma coisa que é complexa, né? Nessa época, é o conceito dos sistemas de afinação, né? Como é que você organiza os intervalos dentro de um sistema de afinação, né? Como se fosse o nosso maior, menor, esse tipo de coisa.
So I raise a research question: which temperament could Auteuil have had in his mind when he describes how every note should be played? and let me say that about every note. There are no other flute methods or text comparable manuals which describes how to play each note in the chromatic scale. Not before, not later. Every note is described, blow there a little bit so, a little bit faster, a little bit slower, do something. And all that is linked to intonation and temperament.
Então ele está perguntando, ele levantou uma pergunta na pesquisa que é: qual era o temperamento? Você sabe o que é temperamento, né? É a forma como você organiza a afinação ali, né? Qual é o temperamento que o Roteter estava em mente quando ele escreve esse livro e descreve a posição de se tocar as notas, né? Ele tinha um temperamento em mente, que certamente não é o que a gente toca hoje, né? Mas havia muitos temperamentos ali, né?
And that is, of course, an important thing because the choice of a temperament as a tuning system considerably influences how the music sounds. And therefore, it's a lengthy section on the Pythagorean comma, the syntonic comma. We don't discuss that now because there's so many figures and complicated mathematics. But that is to show an interesting research question. And the way how to solve that, we can't know exactly. We can say possibly it was something like what a result. But we have the instrument. We have the length of the instrument. We have the bore, the dimension of the bore. We have the tone holes. And these have not moved. There is a similarity with organs. One can make similar research with organs. So then, strictly following the suggestions and instructions from Auteuil, then we can see, does it work? And little by little, a picture clears up. We can't say yes, no, but we can say tendency, possibly, it must have been in this direction and not in this direction.
Eu estou dizendo assim que a questão de conseguir entender qual que é o temperamento que eu usava, né, é muito importante porque muda muito como é que a música soa, né? Aqui isso não é eu que estou falando agora aqui, né? Para quem escutou o concerto ontem, ele tocou em flautas diferentes, que usavam temperamentos diferentes, né? Ele escutou músicas muito diferentes com os instrumentos, né? E ele falou que uma referência para entender os temperamentos, né, é o próprio instrumento, porque o instrumento tem furos nos lugares que correspondem um pouco ao temperamento. Não dá para dizer que é isso ou aquilo, mas pegando o instrumento, com os furos no lugar dele e seguindo o que ele está falando no livro, é possível ter tendências. Tá? Talvez ele use esse temperamento aqui ou aquele, né? E que é uma pesquisa muito parecida que se faz com órgãos, né? Aqui na nossa região nós já tivemos 2 órgãos restaurados que eles tiveram que decidir qual que era o temperamento possivelmente usado. O Robson está aqui não. Qual que era o temperamento possivelmente usado na época, né? Então, with organs, the same thing, right? They decide which temperament was to use at that time, and then they. Então é isso assim. Que o instrumento, so the instrument is a key thing there.
The instrument is crucial in the research progress.
Então, eu falo que o instrumento é crucial para você entender o temperamento.
And then I don't go into detail, but then there are long sections of articulation,
Tem umas sessões em articulação,
musical interpretation, and everything then relates to the period of Ottokar himself. So that is the big block. It takes about almost 200 pages to discuss all these things. Then, as I said in the beginning, it's a comparative study discussing transitions of playing techniques, of aesthetics. So the next section, which is almost as long, then discusses the result from the first section, but in relation to later generations.
That's the number 7?
Yeah, that's number 7.
Okay. Então, ele tá, agora, essa próxima aqui, ele vai discute a questão da transição dos próximos, né? Os próximos modelos que vêm, né? Que aí a transição por estética, por expressão musical, as técnicas de tocar, né? Então, o que ele entendeu do primeiro, que é o roteter, como que isso influencia os próximos, né? So, let me see if I got it right. So, what you took from the studies from roteter, how that influence the next generations that will come with new instruments.
The transition, yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Então, o que ele entendeu do roteter, qual é a influência nisso nos próximos flautistas que vão ter outras expressões musicais, outra estética, né? Outros instrumentos, especialmente. Né? Até o instrumento que a gente toca hoje, que é a flauta Bloom de metal.
And that goes the whole way up to the very late 20th century. And before we go into the methodological question or in depth, the interesting thing is that what was formulated in the first text within the Western tradition, the lips, the air, the tongue, position, basically remained the same up until today, through 4 different kinds of flutes.
Então, isso aqui é interessante, que ele está falando assim, que certas coisas que ele pesquisou no primeiro texto do roteter mantém-se iguais para todos os instrumentos, até no instrumento moderno que a gente usa, é a mesma coisa. Então, um parâmetro que continua.
And an interesting aspect of that is, this is not the result of that everybody from the late 18th century through the 19th century up to the end of the 20th century studied roteter. Not at all. Most people in the 19th century didn't know that text. Many playing the Böhm flute as we are doing, they don't know this text. And that is the interesting thing, tradition. There is some idiomatic things when you play an instrument that moves and moves and moves. And after enough long time, you forgot the source. Yes. For example, when it is, we are joking about that in the flute, which kind of scales should we practice? Yeah, we have a very famous system of scales that was published in a book called the Taffanella-Gobert Flute Method. And some people, even very famous people, claim that it was an innovation of Paul Taffanel. But I say, if you like to think so, do it. But exactly the same scales were in print around 1810. And the books that we use now, it was in print 1923. So that is the interesting thing. Who did find out the what? If there is enough long time that happens, it becomes an element in a collective memory.
Ok. Então ele está dizendo que aqui entra a questão que é da tradição, né? Que a tradição, vamos voltar aqui falando outra coisa, né? Primeiro assim, que essa fonte do roteter não necessariamente era conhecida pelos caras do século XIX. Não conheciam, mas o que o roteter falou lá atrás, o que ele usava, era usado dentro do cara do século XIX. Estou falando que isso acontece no processo da tradição. São coisas que vão sendo passadas, e depois você não sabe de onde que veio, mas você está usando, né? E vai usando, né? Então ele citou, por exemplo, as escalas que os flautistas usam, né, que é um método chamado Tafanel Golbert, que é do início do século XX, que é dito, né, é tido como se fosse o próprio Tafanel que criou, mas nos estudos dele, ele encontrou o mesmo modelo 100 anos antes, no outro método, né? Então, que na passagem da tradição é difícil saber, e aí, de onde que surgiu isso, né? Mas que surgiu em algum momento.
So this is a kind of the outline of the whole work. If we now go to the research design more in depth and methodological considerations,
Then we go to the C.
we go to 1.1 now in C document. Yes.
C document 1.1.
1.1. Because for a research project that want to really go in depth, we all know you need theories, you need methods and strong tools to treat the material you're working with. We can start with the question, if we look at the main title, La Tradition en Mouvement.
Se você olhar o título, a tradição em movimento,
And then we think about the concept tradition, tradition. And
conceito da tradição.
consider that you speak a Latin language and French, and you, so of course we have an idea about what is tradition. But what I try to do is to empty my mind of preset ideas. What is tradition? It's more like I want to see if I see, okay, what is this? Okay, I'm a musician, so I know what it is. It's a music stand. It's not a good music stand. It's not a bad music stand. It's not an ugly. It's not a beautiful. I don't care with that kind of personal, subjective things. I want to see what is it, how does it function. Okay, it looks like that. Apparently, that can be different. But I want to see the function of the music stand and to analyze then the concept of tradition. What is tradition?
O que é a tradição?
And I would like to ask you a question. If someone would ask you to make a definition, what is tradition?
Tradição, assim, pelo menos no vocabulário latino, né, que a gente tem, vem de trazer.
It's like the Latin vocabulary. It comes to bring. Tradição, to bring
Exactly,
from.
yeah.
Bring from.
I use exactly your idea. If we go back to the roots, we can go to Latin and tradition, that goes immediately to Latin, of course. Mm-hmm. But then one can go one step further and see the Romans, the Latins, what did they get from the Greeks then? And you can go even deeper down. And that is exactly the point. And that is a kind of encyclopedical explanation of what it is. Then we can talk about traditions in so many things. We can also, another possible, I guess a possible definition could be, it's a kind of a consensus about how to move your fingers when you play the instrument flute. Because there is a consensus, and this consensus is based on a kind of idiomatic way that has been proven over a longer period of time, maybe 100 years or 50 years. And maybe when we took the flute, the Renaissance flutes that was before the one key traverso, they took probably things over to that flute. Mm-hmm. And then that could be another definition of tradition, so to speak, in practice, that we thought about the same thing, it happens to function. And we could continue, and we could make a symposium on tradition, what it is. But I think that the very point is to empty your mind completely and be aware of biases that we all carry around. We think tradition is this and that. When I use the concept of tradition in Sweden, they say, Jesus Christ, how conservative. How can you talk about tradition? Oh yes, very much so. So they think the connotation is that I am a traditionalist, that only go on tradition. And I said, you understand whatever you want, what I say, but I'm not interested in that. It's just, it is a concept also within Western languages, not the least in Latin languages. Now it happens to be that French is a Latin language, so it makes sense simply to look at it.
So the consensus word there is
it's a possible interpretation.
Yes.
And I think we will often return to the English word, is a possibility for it. It could be, but I would say in better research, one must be very careful to say it is. Some things are, but be careful, be careful. It can be interpreted in many different ways. And that is the start, is then to try to empty your mind. We can just continue with the other concept, movement.
Let me just
Yeah,
take
yeah.
that part first. Mas falando assim, que a questão, quando ele traz a questão, a foda, né, o Lúcio falou sobre a questão de trazer, né? Então, quando ele traz o conceito de tradição para a prática, que no caso da prática da flauta, né? Que, por exemplo, como exemplo, né, certos consensos, né? Consensos, por exemplo, de como segurar o instrumento, né? Eles vão sendo construídos por aquilo que você traz de antes, né? Então, o Rotaterra lá falou que é assim que é melhor segurar o instrumento, o outro depois fala que também é assim também e tudo, e depois vira um consenso que é melhor segurar o instrumento assim, né? E que traz, e esse consenso foi um conceito da própria prática que foi sendo passado, né? E que isso vira uma tradição de se fazer, né?
And then the other word is the mentality, la tradition, okay, on movement. Then we say, what is movement then? Yeah, movement can be everything from doing this to drive a car, or many different things. But here, of course, it's obviously about music, aesthetics, an instrument or different instruments. Often, in a flute environment, and I guess that could be very much the same in a clarinet environment or other environment, there is a kind of a thought that in the Renaissance, the flute was a wooden tube, quasi-cylindrical, with 3 holes there, 3 holes there, and you blow here. Then they made some improvement around 1670, and it put a key. So it was easier to play D sharp and E flat. And then a little bit later in the 18th century, you put even more keys on the flute, and it was better flute. And then we have the culmination with the flute that we play today, the Bohm flute, that was constructed 1847. That is the culmination. It's a much better instrument. So it's a kind of thought like Charles Darwin, the origin of species. Mammals, lions, tigers, they are better, more developed animals than dinosaurs, something like that. And there is also connotation to trade. For example, you have the trade markets, the economical growth, and things like that. There are definitely connotations in development. So one must ask, in my opinion, and that was how I was trained as a researcher, ask the most obvious question: what is movement?
Então, vem de trás para frente, né? Que é importante na pesquisa você perguntar questões óbvias. O que é o movimento, né? O que é a tradição? O que é o movimento, né? É a questão da terminologia na pesquisa, né, gente? Você tem a terminologia com muita clareza, né? É a questão da terminologia, né? E aí ele está falando assim que botou em vários contextos da terminologia, né? Até no Darwin, né? O que seria movimento, né? Dizendo que um animal que evoluiu ali do dinossauro, né? Um animal desenvolvido, né? Com certos desenvolvimentos biológicos, né? É uma coisa nos instrumentos que foram construídos, né? A partir antes do Rotaterra, ele fez o instrumento. O Rotaterra fez o instrumento ficar cônico para tirar o efeito de brilho. Depois botou uma chave, depois botou umas outras chaves que ajudavam. E isso vai lá desenvolvendo, né? Então, isso ele caracteriza como movimento. Seria movimento, né?
And we can double check this question. How did musicians and flute players perceive new constructions of the instrument? Yes, we know exactly that when Theobald Böhm made his first model of a flute, 1832, which is very similar to Traverse, it's a quasi-conical instrument with some more keys. The flautistic environment dismissed the flute. They say it's good for the mechanism, but it's not a good flute because it doesn't sound like a normal flute. And let me give you an example. The alto saxophone is very similar to clarinet. The length, the compass. And I would say, at least many of my clarinet colleagues, if I said that the alto saxophone is like a better clarinet, it's not at all sounding like a clarinet. It's a saxophone sound, and we prefer the clarinet sound. So you can see, and with this we have lots of documents, especially from the 19th century, because the 19th century and the flutes, as for many other instruments, was a century of experimentation.
I'm good.
And that, I think, is the interesting thing. So nobody says that the epoch of Lully, because the change of the traverso to one key happened in the Lully operas, as around 1670, 80, 90. Nothing says that Lully would have been more happy with the Böhm flute that we play today. And let me just give one example that is really interesting, that we can prove. When Richard Wagner's Parsifal should be played for the first time, was it 1881 or 1882, something like that? Then they took the best musicians from Munich and some other cities. They take the court from Munich. And as a matter of fact, in Parsifal, the flute has a little bit more to do. You can hear the flute. If many Wagner operas, you don't hear the flute. So sort of clarinet and oboe. Anyhow, after a little while in the rehearsal work of Parsifal for the first performance, the principal flutist from Munich was asked to come and have a discussion with the conductor, Hermann von Levi, because the conductor should tell the flutist that Richard Wagner thought he was a brilliant flutist, but if he wants to continue and play the premiere of Parsifal, he has a choice. You go back to Munich, you come back with the old system flute. And if you don't come back with the old system flutes, then you stay in Munich and we take another flutist. So with that we could see that the great composer Richard Wagner, he completely dismissed the flutes that we play today, because literally Richard Wagner said, it sounds like guns, it's too loud. I don't want that. So there you have an interesting example.
That's like a question within the aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
In the aesthetics, right? Então, assim, está falando aqui que dentro da pesquisa surgem questões como, por exemplo, que daí são questões, né, do próprio campo, né, de trabalho, que é como é que as pessoas, como é que os flautistas viram na prática deles essas mudanças. Nós estamos dizendo aqui que as mudanças foram melhorando o instrumento, mas como é que as pessoas que tocavam viam as mudanças, né? E que, por exemplo, quando o Böhm, que é essa flauta que a gente toca de metal, né, fez as primeiras flautas, que o pessoal que estava em volta dele na Alemanha falou assim, de jeito nenhum, nós não vamos tocar isso não. A flauta até parece boa com a mecânica aqui, mas o som é horrível, o som é muito igual, né? Se pegar o traverso, tem tantos dedos cruzados assim, né? Que cada tonalidade soa diferente. E é isso que eles gostavam. Eles acharam a flauta igual demais, não quiseram tocar, né? Daí dá um outro exemplo aqui, que na ópera do Wagner, o flautista de Munique usou uma dessas flautas modernas, né? E que o maestro falou assim, se você quiser continuar tocando aqui, vai lá e busca a flauta antiga. Com isso aí você não vai tocar. Mas tocar era bom, né? Então aí que é a questão da transição, no sentido isso que eu perguntei no final, no sentido da estética, né? A estética também diz alguma coisa no sentido de você compreender a transição do instrumento, né? Porque às vezes existe um melhoramento do instrumento, mas a percepção estética da sonoridade do instrumento não comporta aquele melhoramento, né? É isso que ele está dizendo ali, né?
And the interesting end of that story is the flutist went back to Bayreuth and he said, I never regretted to go back to the old flute. That's
o flautista voltou, né? Voltou para o Teatro Bayreuth também, com a flauta velha, né? Falou assim, nunca me arrependi de voltar para o instrumento velho, nem ele queria.
And in the research context, we can say, okay, it happens to be the object flute, a kind of transverse flute, but this could easily be transposed to something else. The interesting thing is the pattern, so to speak, and that it is not for taking to granted that new constructions were perceived as good things. Not like a car from 1920 compared with a good car from today. Of course, the today car, at least from a mechanical point of view, is much better and it's more safe. Anyhow, so that was an example. But then, when we deal with these complicated things, we need to frame it in theory.
Então, quando você lida com essa complexidade de fatores, né? Que está aí, gente, em volta de um método, né, você está vendo? E daí você precisa de achar um um arco teórico, um fundamento teórico, né, que possa lidar com essa complexidade.
And also to rely on research methods which functions. And there's a plenitude of possibilities. But, and one has to make a choice, of course.
Então, e também se fundamentar em um método de pesquisa que seja eficiente para a pesquisa, né? Então, ele falou, ó, em fundamento, em marco teórico, né? Ele diz, marco teórico é uma boa palavra, né? E agora está falando em metodologia. Então, marco teórico, metodologia. Né? A disciplina de metodologia 1, né? do curso de animação. Né? Nós vamos ver esses dois conceitos que estão na pesquisa de qualquer um de vocês, né? Que é ter um marco teórico e ter a metodologia adequada e eficiente. Desculpa.
So the present study, also what we are talking about now, the present study is based on a hermeneutical approach.
Então, o estudo presente, com o marco teórico, é a hermenêutica.
And as we know that hermeneutics is something that goes back to the antiquity, so there we also have to make limitations. We can't go maybe the whole way back to Plato and Aristotle. We have to make a choice. And the choice that I have made is I wanted to have a brilliant intellectual from the period of le grand siècle, as we call it in French, as that basically covers the lifetime of Louis XIV, Ludwig IV and XIV. I wanted to have a brilliant intellectual from the period dealing with translations, hermeneutics, and philological questions about language. And there is a personality which is highly interesting as a woman, Madame Anne Dacier.
Is she from the same time period, right?
Yes, Madame Dacier was born 1645, and she passed away 1720.
Let me just translate. I think that's very important. So, então ele escolhe. She's a philosopher.
Yes, she's a translator, philological things, and yeah.
Então ele pega aí os trabalhos, né, dessa pessoa que era adequada, né, porque ela era da mesma época ali do objeto de estudo dele, né, que ela era tradutora e filóloga, né, gente que estuda livro, né, filologia é o estudo do livro.
Yeah, and she's brilliant, and she was married with a man called André Dacier that had the same occupation. But everybody knew in the context in Paris that the brilliant member of the family Dacier, that was Madame Dacier. She was very famous.
Ela vinha de uma família, ela era casada com uma pessoa Dacier, que fazia a mesma coisa, e ela era brilhante nesse sentido.
And she was a specialist in Latin and the Greek languages at antiquity, and made many translations of Homer as a l'Iliade, l'Odyssée, Terentius, many things like that, which was in reprint the whole 18th century, even up in the 19th century. And she was considered as one of the most brilliant brains of the period of le grand siècle.
Então ela trouxe, né? Ela era uma pessoa que era especialista no conceito chamado do grande século, né? E ela fez essas traduções dessas fontes primárias lá de trás, né? Do que ele falou ali, né? Então, uma coisa importante que ele falou lá atrás, né? Que a hermenêutica vai lá nos gregos, né? É um estudo que ele tem uma longitudinal de muitos anos para trás. Né?
And what is also interesting with Madame Dacier is that she often relates to music. She compares the process of translating from the Greek and Latin from the antiquity to how a musician makes a score sound. And that's a very interesting comment. So it's directly linked to music. And
é ligado à música, como é que a pessoa faz o som através da partitura.
And it's also interesting that it happens to be a brilliant brain. If that then is a woman or a man, it doesn't interest me very much. But I think it has some importance also but she's not, I have not brought her in because she's a woman and to follow some kind of a feminist discussion. Not at all. She is brought in because she's so good. That's the reason. That's the only reason.
O interesse é que ela realmente era muito boa, né? Porque na pesquisa dele, ele não tem assim, esse interesse em dizer se era um homem ou se era uma mulher, né? Mas ele foi ali, pegou, trouxe ela, porque ela realmente era acima, né, dos outros que estavam ali, né? Ela era brilhante.
So that is one source, theoretically linked directly to France and the period.
Então,
Then-
essa é um marco teórico que leva diretamente na França àquele período, né? É um marco teórico da época, né?
But this is not enough. I need more tools. So the next tool, hermeneutical tool I use, is by a German, Johann Martin Schladenius, and he was born 1710 and passed away 1759.
Então, é um alemão, o próximo marco teórico aí é Schladenius, que é alemão também do mesmo período.
And he has written a key text, published 1742. The German title is Einleitung zur richtigen Auslegung vernünftiger Reden und Schriften. And that has to do then with interpretation of text, that is hermeneutics. So that is the second source.
Então, é um texto que também se relaciona com a questão da interpretação do texto mesmo, né?
And we are still in the 18th century, although we are on the other side of the big river, right? We are now in Germany, but still, we are in the 18th century. And we are still in the first part of the 18th
Então, ele
century.
está usando fontes que são de lá, né?
Then we continue.
É,
I need more sources, I need more tools.
preciso de mais ferramentas ainda.
And the next step is then romantic hermeneutics. And there is, I'm sure you know the name, and his material is Friedrich Schleiermacher.
Schleiermacher. Então, agora é a hermenêutica romântica, né? 19th century.
Friedrich Schleiermacher was born 1768
Então, ele
and passed
nasceu-
away 1834.
Então, ele é 1768,
1768, yeah.
1768 e morreu em 1835, né? 1835.
1834, yeah.
Por favor.
And one of his really important texts is Hermeneutik und Kritik. Hermeneutics and Critics.
Então o texto dele importante
I'm
é
sure you know
hermenêutica
the
e
text.
crítica. Já é um texto para frente, né? De quase almost 100 years.
Yeah, so we are still, I mean, after all, he was born 1768. He's a man of the 18th century, basically. As I am a man of the 20th century. I was born in the mid-1950s. I've still survived, but of course, I'm profoundly influenced of how the world was in the 20th century.
Yes.
Of course, as I'm a 20th century dinosaur. So anyhow, then we continue, and that is with, and I'm sure you know the name, Wilhelm Dilthey. That's a little bit later. Dilthey lived from 1833 to 1911.
O Dilthey morreu de 1835 a 1911. Também, also dealing with the same hermeneutic.
Yes, now we're dealing with hermeneutics, with different, hermeneutics is not one thing,
Right.
it's many things. So other aspects of hermeneutics,
yes.
and the texts that I use, especially when it comes to Dilthey, is Die Entstehung der Hermeneutik, also the foundations of hermeneutics, you could say.
Fundamento.
Yeah, fundament. Yeah, much better. Thank you. Much better. But I need more tools. I need strong tools for this.
Precisa de mais ferramentas ainda.
And the next person is then Martin Heidegger.
Heidegger, aí já é quem
Filósofo
conhece.
alemão.
Yes. There are many Germans.
Germans.
Yeah, because I lived in Germany, so and I'm familiar with the German tradition when it comes to this. I'm not German, I'm Swedish, and then the book, he's a very complex personality, Martin Heidegger. We know that. It's even sometimes I have heard the question, and I'm sure you have heard it too. Some people dismiss Heidegger from beginning to end because of what happened in the 1930s. We should be aware of all these kind of things. But Still, I must say, and some of his works are so complicated, so that they do not fit into this project at all. But his text, the English title is The Origin of the Work of Art. That is possible to use here. But not the other text, that's something else. But this key text, Der Ursprung des Kunstwerkes, definitely, and we'll try to give you an example a little bit later. And finally, then the last tool is Gadamer, Hans-Georg Gadamer.
E o último marco teórico é o Gadamer.
Yeah, and of course you know which text that is. That is Wahrheit und Methode. That's truth and method. So
É livro muito conhecido, chamado Verdade e Método.
So then I would say,
Ele é da música, não? Gadamer?
Gadamer não.
Metodologia de pesquisa.
So then I would say, when we start with Madame Dacier and we go the whole way up to Gadamer, we cover also the period up to, more or less.
Ele veio com referências, com marcos teóricos dentro do mesmo, né, objeto de estudo, da mesma temática, que é a hermenêutica, mas ele veio com marcos teóricos que cobrem o período da pesquisa, né?
And altogether, this shapes an extremely strong tool to, so to speak, deal with the research problem. But I think I want to highlight one comment on that. I'm a musician, trained to be principal flute in an orchestra and have that job. I'm also a professor teaching future generations how to play the flute. And I also then later made the education to be having my PhD and the doctoral title. So, of course, I had never had the time in my life to study philosophy 10 years. Some people tell me, why don't you introduce Immanuel Kant in your work? And then I say, yes, that could be a very good idea, indeed. But can you then give me 5 years' time that I can only deal with material from Kant, and you can please give me a very good supervisor, and so as I really get it right. If you can do that, then later I might introduce Immanuel Kant.
This is so important.
Because I would just say so. We should also be careful. We are from the artistic environment. We are not less brilliant than anyone other, but we have also spent enormous much time to learn to play our instruments or to train our voices. Enormous much time.
Isso aqui que ele está falando é uma coisa muito importante, porque é a delimitação das referências que você consegue lidar, né? Não adianta você lidar com uma referência que você não dá nem tempo de estudar, né? Você está dizendo que foi treinado, né, para ser flautista, e foi flautista de uma ópera grande na Alemanha por muitos anos, né? Então, professor depois em várias escolas, no Royal Academy lá de Manchester, depois na Malmo também, na Academia Liszt na Hungria, né? Mas que lidando com esse estudo de trabalho com música, não dá tempo de estudar tanta filosofia. Então, estudou os que ele conseguiu, né? E algumas pessoas falam assim, por que você também não coloca o Kant aí como referência? Ele fala, se você me der 5 anos para estudar. Então, assim, mas a conclusão desse pedacinho que ele está falando aqui, que a gente tem que entender muito bem para a gente como pesquisador, músico, pesquisador, né? É assim, é um referencial que você consegue, né? É melhor você ter certos referenciais que você consegue lidar com ele do que expandir tanto com coisas que você não consegue profundidade em nada, né, Edilson? A ideia bem é essa mesmo, né?
But I think if we are aware of that we didn't have the time, most of us, to spend 10 or 15 years of hard philosophical training, then we can still, if we are aware of it, and I also declare that, when I made my PhD, I declared I have basically very similar sources, because that was also hermeneutical work. So, of course, I know, as I said with Kant, I know, I will be very careful, but I insist that elements of what I make reference to, for example, Heidegger or whatever it might be, I'm also convinced that I don't want to comment the whole output of Heidegger, absolutely not. That would be amateurism. Without end. But I know that if I stick to the text, The Origin of Arts, that Heidegger wrote, I'm on pretty safe ground. Maybe don't get the whole thing, but I get by far more than enough to be on safe ground. That is something that could be discussed, of course, but I think that is important to announce that, also that I announce it, because that really very complicated texts we are talking about, and it needs enormous much time.
Very difficult.
Then I would just like to add also two more very important things. Now this is a kind of philosophical material and quite practical methodological questions that these authors treats. Another important source in my work is Marcel Proust, also the French author Marcel Proust, à la recherche du temps perdu.
Aí é o Marcel Proust, né? What's the title?
La recherche. Also In Search of Lost Time, à la recherche du temps perdu.
Procura em tempo perdido.
Yes, because maybe some of you have read this incredible 7-volume novel. There are observations made by Marcel Proust, not the least in the 7th volume of À la recherche, Le temps retrouvé, as a time rediscovered. And in that last volume, there are many thoughts and discussions on art. And I'm very aware what the things that Proust discusses. We could say he's a child of the 19th century, and he writes his incredible novel 1913 to 1927. Basically, it's finished there, and that is far away from Haute Terre and Le Grand Siècle. At the same time, the French, in a sense, we can use the word traditionalists. They are very proud of the history, of course. They're proud of the Le Grand Siècle. And as you know, the French, maybe there are some French people here, so I should not say too much, but the French, they're very proud of the heritage of the Roman Empire and things like that. And the Greeks, and they think very often that they are, so to speak, carrying on the tradition from the Greeks and very much so from the Roman.
Eles têm orgulho de estar carregando essa tradição que vem lá de trás, né? Dos romanos, dos
And I think some people ask me, do you think it's serious to integrate a work of art like Marcel Proust in a research project like this? And I think definitely yes. That's my personal opinion. Because the discussions on creation of art and what art might be and how art happens to be created definitely holds stress test.
Está falando, você está discutindo a pertinência do uso desta fonte num objeto de pesquisa que está lá atrás, né? Há quase 200 anos antes, né? Mas ele acha que é pertinente, porque da forma como ele discute arte, o que é arte, tudo, é pertinente ao objeto de estudo, né? Então, assim, é aquela coisa da clareza do pesquisador. Essa referência é realmente pertinente ao meu objeto de estudo? Por quê? Né? Ele disse as duas coisas. E por quê? Né?
And then we can say what can be extracted from these sources is that if we think about Madame Dacier and del-Rei, in very different ways they discuss something that we could roughly translate something like an enlarged concept of what language might be. Then we could say, we know that many people say music is a language. Yes, that is related to the thing, but it's far more complicated than that. But it kind of, when Madame Dacier compares the process, when she translates the Greek of the antiquity to the French language of the very beginning of the 18th century, and when she compares that to how a musician makes a score alive with his or her instrument, that is an example of what the concept of enlarged language could be.
Então, ele está falando que essas duas primeiras fontes, que é a Madame Dacier, né, e o outro que é what's the second
Also Madame Dacier and del-Rei.
Del-Rei, né? Que eles discutem do que é a língua num contexto mais amplo, né? E comparam com o processo da música, quando você traduz os sinais, né, da música, né? Os signos da música em sons. Né?
Another important perspective is then also that we can say it's not only Gadamer, he did not invent, but he did discuss very much the concept of horizon of understanding. So that is something that directly can be applied on this, because you can say the horizon of understanding. What is then this text principe? Is it a manual? Is it a flute method? What is it? And that depends on the horizon of understanding. Most of our flute colleagues would say that principe by Ottedal is a flute method. But I would say absolutely not, because a method, per definition, is something that goes from the very easy gradually to the more complicated, and maybe to more very complicated. And in the case of Ottedal, he wrote a method, but not for the flute. He wrote a method for the musette, and the musette is some kind of indoor, sophisticated bagpipe instrument, as I'm sure you know. Yeah.
Then, quando você esse autor, who's the author who works on the horizon of understanding? Who's the author that brings the
enlarged horizon? That's Gadamer.
Ele discute esse conceito que é o horizonte de um entendimento, né? Então, entender se aquela fonte ali, igual eu estava exemplificando, aquela fonte ali é um método ou é um manual, né? Um método traz uma forma progressiva de você aprender com exercício e tudo, né? Já o manual não, é um outro tipo de conhecimento, né? Para o autoensino, na verdade, né? O manual. Então, que isso é importante, né? Você entender, na verdade, a fonte do que ela realmente é, né? Como ela realmente é.
Yeah, and if you would ask me, Schladenius and these German from the mid-18th century, what did he bring them? Yes, he has a long discussion on the concept of Sehepunkt. And if you would translate Sehepunkt to English, it would be something like viewpoint. And then he, in the beginning of his explanation of what it is, he compares with a battle, as two armies. In old days, a battle between two armies. That you have a little hill here, you can have one observer there. Mm-hmm. You have one observer maybe on the front there. You can think about Waterloo with Napoleon. And then maybe you have one seeing the battle from the back, from a completely different point of view. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they see different things. Of course, yes. we know that. So that can everybody understand. But the next step is then, how can we make a kind of symbiosis of these different points where you see the same thing, but you don't see the same thing? And there, we can then say, when I play on the traverse myself, then I have a kind of viewpoint if I go to the traverse as being the Böhm flute player. I have the virtuosity for the Böhm flute, so I go into the traverse with my virtuosity playing the Böhm flute. But I could also go into playing the Böhm flute, try to free myself from the virtuosity on how to play the Böhm flute, and try to empty my mind and see, what does the instrument do with me? Can the instrument teach me something? If I give in, so to speak, to the instrument, I could force the instrument and use my virtuosic Böhm flute technique. Of course, it's helpful anyhow. But if I give in and let the instrument be my teacher, because that's a great possibility, that the instrument can teach me what comes out of the instrument. So, and that would then be an example of the Sehepunkt, as a viewpoint, simply. From how do I look at it, from where? Of course, it has a direct connection to the idea of horizon of understanding, but it's not exactly the same thing. And therefore, I think it's very important in this kind of research that we try to be precise also.
So you're trying to understand the viewpoint of the researcher.
Yeah, and I try to understand the viewpoint of the instrument itself, without doing much. And maybe I can show you an example of that from Heidegger.
Então, a gente está falando que esse autor, ele fala sobre a questão do ponto de vista daquele que está olhando, né? Ele fala que é uma batalha, né? Uma batalha. Se a pessoa vier olhar a batalha por trás, ela enxerga uma coisa. Se ela olhar a batalha de um lado, ela enxerga de outro. Se ela olhar de outro, ela enxerga de outro, né? Então, por exemplo, no caso você está falando assim, do traverso barroco, né? Que ele toca e está estudando a fonte do traverso barroco, que é o Toté. Ele vem de uma tradição de tocar uma flauta moderna. Então, é alguém da flauta moderna olhando ali, né? E, ao mesmo tempo, você pode esvaziar isso e tentar esvaziar esse seu ponto de vista e tentar deixar o instrumento ou o material de pesquisa dele dizer para você o que ele é. Entendeu? Então, assim, o ponto de vista de quem está fazendo também é modificado.
And then you could ask me, why do I bring in Schleiermacher? Yeah, because Schleiermacher makes a very important statement that you must, if you watch and study a historical object, Prinzip is a historical object.
Então, o Schleiermacher fala assim, se você está estudando um objeto histórico, como essa fonte, que é um objeto histórico, o rodapé, o livro.
And then Schleiermacher, I'm sure you already know it, he says that you must contextualize the historical object that you are studying to such a degree that you understand the contextualization of the historical object better than its author. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, we can say that, in a sense, we all could, while looking at an object like Principe, that could be many other things, of course, in a sense, we can do a thing that Ottetai couldn't do, because we can put it in a broad historical context that goes long before Ottetai was working. We can go to the Renaissance, to treatises with Jean de Fer and lots of things, and then everything coming after.
Meta vision.
Yes, and therefore I have tried to, I don't know if that would be good if we could have shown that. I have made a chart.
What's the?
That is appendix 1.
Let translate this point.
That's so appendix 1, because there is then a big chart that takes several pages. There is one column with people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example.
What's the page?
The page.
Anders, hold on. Let me get this point you just told.
Yeah.
That's very important for them. No? That's what's the author really is. What's the author?
This is Schleiermacher.
Schleiermacher.
We are talking about the contextualization of the historical object in a reliable historical context.
Yes.
Because we haven't been there in the early 18th century in France. So then we can't understand the text, whatever the object, if we don't make a real effort to understand the surrounding, what happens happened at that time. And therefore I made a long document, Appendix 1, where you see on the left side names and birth dates, etc., of, it could be Blaise Pascal.
Yeah, okay. Get the first part for you.
Yeah.
Então ele está falando que o Schleiermacher ele traz, né, como ponto de vista teórico, quando você está estudando uma fonte histórica, você tem que contextualizar a fonte histórica com o que acontecia em volta daquela fonte histórica na época dele e com fontes que sejam pertinentes. De uma certa forma, que você possa ver aquele objeto de estudo, como é o método que ele está olhando ali, enxergar a complexidade dele do momento de uma forma que nem o Roteté poderia, porque o Roteté estava imbuído lá dentro, ele estava inserido dentro dele, né? Ele não via, mas a gente como pesquisador consegue ver o que era antes, o que era depois, o que estava no entorno dele. Então, a metavisão, você consegue ver de fora, né? Então, o Schleiermacher está dizendo que para você entender uma fonte histórica, é preciso que você tenha uma visão ampla do entorno dela, da contextualização social, inclusive, né, tudo, e numa visão que o próprio autor não consegue. Interessante para pesquisa, né? Daí você, né?
And what I then try to create is a French environment.
Aí ele fez uma tabela que ele compara tempo. E aí eu vi ontem com ele em casa, mas ele compara temporalmente o que acontecia em vários campos, vamos dizer, do pensamento, da música, da arte, longitudinalmente, né? Como assim?
So you have, for example,
what's the page?
That's Appendix 1. So if you roll down, I can see it should be something like 270 or so. You will find it. But then on the left you have with names like Pascal, Blaise Pascal.
Appendix what?
Huh?
Appendix
one.
Aqui. Tá
Yeah,
aqui.
appendix one. With philosophers, specialists in rhetoric, grammar, authors.
Tá vendo aqui, gente? Olha, ó, ele coloca lá. Ele coloca, por exemplo.
And then to the right, you have a column with, for example, Molière, Racine, Rameau. And then you have a column with a selected list of works. For example, some plays by Racine or by Molière.
Let me translate this. This is really interesting.
And it just, so I say, and then there's one column, flutists.
Ok. Então, olha, ele fez uma lista, olha lá, vocês viram? Tá vendo uma tabela? Né? Isso é metodologia, tá vendo? Fez uma tabela, que aqui tem a década, aqui tem autores, filósofos, tradutores, gente que a estética da época, a gramática da época, a filologia, poesia, retórica, os dicionários. Do lado de cá tem compositores, os instrumentos, a voz, a dança, o teatro e a arte, né? Aqui, flautistas, que é um objeto de estudo, né? E uma seleção de publicações da época. Então, dessa forma, ele consegue relacionar, ó, por exemplo, nesse ponto aqui, por exemplo, ó, rapidinho aqui, que é muito interessante, por exemplo, nesse ponto aqui, por exemplo, ele tem o Blaise Pascal, o La Fontaine, né? Do outro lado aqui, ele tem o Molière, né? Tudo isso junto de uma fonte de estudo que estava ali, happening all at the same time, all these people, right?
Yeah, more or less. It starts before, because, as we can say, I'm a child of the 20th century. So that's how it is. So because I decided I can't start in the year when Otita was born. I must start before. So because when he was a boy and grown up, I don't know if he was. Now we know from the heritage that I had quite many books after when he passed away. But anyhow, the Le Grand Siècle was, so to speak, shaped by things that happened even a little bit before. And then the Le Grand Siècle had an influence also later. So we can say, I think I started 1610 or something like that.
Yeah,
1610.
1610. Yeah, 1610.
And the last decade, I think that's 1800.
Yeah, which one decade?
So it covers well before, I think he was born 1674 or something like that. So it's about 75 years before, or 50 years before he was born, and he died somewhere in the 1760s. So it's 30, 40 years after also. So you frame him completely.
That's right, 1674. Then you have what's before and what's after.
And then you can see this column with flautistas is of course interesting because you can see who taught who. So you can see that the first teachers as the Paris Conservatoire was taught by Michel Blavet, that was born 1700. And then they played the traverso. There was no discussion. So, but then we go into the flute landscape. So, and this is a method then to really to follow Schleiermacher word. I must do this. It's a complicated thing.
Então, para você seguir o que o Schleiermacher fala, você tem que fazer esse tipo de coisa. É complicado, mas aí você tem o entendimento do contexto da obra, da pessoa, do que acontecia, né? Que aquele objeto pequeno ali, que é um métodozinho, está inserido dentro de uma coisa que é ampla, né?
And then, of course, this kind of research work with strong intellectual tools is something intellectual. But there is also something of intuition in the work. And there I use an intuitive approach, and there I relate to Marcel Proust. And it makes sense, I think.
A abordagem intuitiva também, essa é uma abordagem intelectual alta, que ele fala primeiro, né? Mas também existe uma abordagem intuitiva, que é o Proust.
And I think I will just not be too lengthy, but also show you 2 or 3 examples. I think we have time for that. And one example is then, if we take the concept of enlarged language, as we did discuss before.
Pegando o exemplo de língua expandida, né? Linguagem expandida.
And we know that some cornerstones within hermeneutical theory is that the little part is mirrored in the whole, and the whole is mirrored in the little part.
Então,
That we
pegar na
know.
hermenêutica, um conceito lá dentro da hermenêutica, que é a parte pequena está espelhada no grande, né? No todo. O pequeno está espelhado no todo. E o todo espelhado numa pequena parte, né?
Everybody knows. So that's how it happens. And we also know that a very important, we can say, thought or idea is the idea of the hermeneutical circle.
E é a ideia do círculo hermenêutico.
And if we go for an explanation, what might, I'm sure you know, but I can just say then, Gadamer Heidegger, they explain it as if you were studying, reading Greek of the antiquity.
Se você está estudando leituras da Grécia Antiga,
You have to attack you must study the language, and then you start to read the text, the first sentence, and you can try to understand the first sentence with the help of grammar, for example, and word books and things like that. And then there will be many more sentences. The first sentence then gives you a kind of preliminary understanding of something, but it's only preliminary. And the second step is that you read the second sentence. Something comes with you from the first sentence, and the second sentence sheds light on the first sentence. So they kind of symbiosis in between them. That is a kind of an explanation on the hermeneutical circles, that it enlarges, so to speak, and it gets more and more.
Vocês entenderam isso? Entendeu? O círculo hermenêutico é assim, como que ele acontece, né? Então, falando assim, dá um exemplo de a pessoa pegar uma fonte grega que ela quer estudar, né? Então, primeiro ele vai entender a língua, a gramática, né? Mas quando ele lê a primeira frase, já, né? Dá uma noção preliminar do que é, mas é muito preliminar. Quando você lê a segunda frase, você já percebe mais, porque a segunda frase se relaciona com a primeira. E assim por diante, né? À medida que você vai expandindo a leitura, você vai ter um entendimento mais amplo daquilo que você está estudando.
This procedure is then stepwise, the preliminary understanding will be deepened. And that's the idea of the hermeneutical circle. Mm-hmm. Now, an example of how I use the concept of enlarged language in combination with the hermeneutical circle in relation to the text principle.
Então, agora um exemplo de como que ele usou a ideia, né, da linguagem expandida, do círculo hermenêutico, com o objeto de estudo dele, que é o princípio do rodapé, o princípio. Né?
And now we must talk a little bit through technique. So I will explain for you.
Pouquinho da técnica da flauta.
But it's very simple. When you play a note, you can have a position, we can say the normal position. We can have another position, we turn the flute out. That's not really used in this kind of techniques we use nowadays, but that was used at that time. You turn the flute out, and that has the effect that the pitch raises. Or you turn the flute in, and it goes down, the pitch. So these are three positions.
Então, tem três posições. Ele está explicando sobre como é que é a questão da flauta. Tem três posições. Toca do jeito que está, se você virar a flauta para fora, sobe a afinação. Se você virar a flauta para dentro, desce a afinação.
So that is the point of departure. Now, the lowest note on the traverso is D.
A nota mais grave no traverso
So
D.
Ré. That's the lowest note. How can you play a C sharp? A half tone step down.
Como você pode tocar dó sustenido?
Is it possible or not? According to Otteter and other sources of the periods, yes, we can do that. We don't change the foot joint.
Então, de acordo com o rodapé, é possível. Sem mexer nada na flauta, é possível tocar dó sustenido, mas a última nota é ré.
So,
meio tom abaixo.
We can't make the flute longer. We keep the same flute. So the only way to make the flute play a semitone step down is to turn the flute in.
Então, o único jeito que tem é você virar a flauta bem para dentro, você consegue tocar.
Because then it will flatten, and then you can flatten half a tone. Yeah, but if your normal position is too much turned inwards, then there is not more to turn in, so you can't get half a tone down.
Então, se a sua posição para tocar já está muito virada, você não consegue chegar meio tom abaixo.
If you play two outwards as normal, if that is your position, you very easily will play the low C sharp, but all the other notes will be completely out of tune.
Se você é uma pessoa que toca tudo para fora, você vai conseguir tocar a nota, né, o meio tom para o dó sustenido, mas vai estar tudo o resto, todo o resto vai estar desafinado.
So in other words, you must find a normal position that makes basically all notes in tune, but that allows you so much space to turn the flute in, so you can get the C sharp.
Então você tem que achar uma posição que se consegue tocar todas as notas, mas que dá o espaço suficiente para você virar para dentro e tocar um toque sustenido.
And now is an interesting question, and now we are into the hermeneutical circle thoughts in an extended language idea. Otteter never describes how to find the normal position.
Mas aí o Otteter não descreve como é que acha a posição normal, que não é nem virado para fora nem para dentro. E aí você entra dentro do ciclo da hermenêutica.
But thanks to that, he suggests the idea to play the low C sharp. We can deduce. So the first step is we know what happens. Next thing, normal, out, in. Okay, but where is normal? It's easy to find in and out, but where is normal? And normal is the key to find the good intonation for the whole instrument, including the low C sharp. One should note the low C sharp was never really used. Maybe by a great virtuoso could do it, and an amateur could do it for fun. But maybe more important, it was used to find the normal position. But he does not reveal where the normal position is. But if you can get the C sharp and the rest of the flute in tune, then you found. And then you could say, I can use the idea of, I read the first sentence in Old and Greek or the Antiquity. Okay, I understand. Turning out makes sharp, turning in makes flat. There is something in the middle. Okay, that's first step. Then I try to find that half semitone step down, which then gives me the key to find the normal position. So you understand the procedure. And that is then the idea that you use the concept of enlarged language, because neither Madame Dacier or Heidegger talks in these terms of the hermeneutical circle, but it is then an application of the hermeneutical circle. But there I need a strong scientific tool discussing enlarged language, that, so to speak, legitimize my method.
Entendeu, gente? Então, assim, o Otteter fala, virando para dentro, dá meio tom abaixo, virando para fora, você sobe. Mas ele não descreve o que é o lugar normal, que é o lugar bom para você tocar, né? Mas a ideia é que se você consegue chegar no meio tom para baixo, voltando, você está no lugar normal, né? Mas para ele afirmar isso, já que o Otteter não fala, ele precisa de um referencial teórico, que é a linguagem expandida, né? Se você disse isso, então isso quer dizer isso, né?
A gente procurar as entrelinhas mesmo.
As entrelinhas. Exatamente.
Quer que providencie o projetor ainda?
Não acho que não precisa, né? Do you think
No, I don't think it. I think we use the old method. So that was an example of how you could use the idea of extended language. And I don't think my authority is strong enough. So if I just raise the idea of extended language, I need some backbone. I simply need some references. It's not my fabulous idea of extended language. I need something to have backup. Yes, he can use that idea of extended language, but then please prove us that you don't think that you invented the wheel. Because that's one of the most ridiculous things in many contexts like this, that people come up with a brilliant idea and you invent the wheel one more time. And that is, of course, pathetic and ridiculous. So you must also show that you are related, you have a backbone, you have studied, you know where you are. So I think that is an example. I think I would like to finish with an idea from Heidegger, and maybe then very short quotes by.
Just need you to
Yeah, sure.
Sign it here, too.
Oh, I think I signed.
I see.
Yeah. And I think the easiest way to explain this would be if I simply read my text from the book, and then Tonino can translate if necessary.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go back
So
to-
if you go to page 4 in the C document, and then we can also, I will show you a painting by Van Gogh. And maybe some of you already know, but it's nice to put it in the context.
Okay, page 4.
Yeah, and as a page 4, and the section that starts with a musical instrument, that is on somewhere in the middle.
Okay, a music instrument.
Yeah, so I can read the text and you translate. A musical instrument,
Instrumento musical,
in the present context, a traverso,
no presente contexto, que é o traverso,
is the result of successive development of transverse fluids has meant that the instrument, by virtue of its construction, its intrinsic possibilities, and in a sense, plays itself. It has an inner logic. The instrument.
é o resultado de uma sucessiva, né, então, quer dizer, o instrumento musical no presente contexto, o traverso, é o resultado de sucessivos desenvolvimentos de flautas transversais, has meant that the instrument, que significa que aquele instrumento, by virtue of its construction, pela sua construção, traz possibilidades intrínsecas, né, in a sense, plays itself. E no certo sentido, para ele mesmo, toca ele mesmo, né?
And this phenomenon could be compared to, this can be likened to a maietic process, in the same manner as Socrates' famous metaphor that the teacher with questions, in this case the teacher is the transverse flute,
No caso aqui,
elicits
o professor é a
intrinsic,
própria flauta.
yeah, elicits intrinsic opportunities in the students, in this case the flute player. So we all know that the maietic method from Socrates was based on his mother was a midwife. We discussed that the other day. And
Sócrates, né? O
Yeah,
método de Sócrates.
a midwife is a woman. She knows how to make babies. That's the first step. Second step is that she carried the baby for 9 months in her body. The third step is that she gave birth to the baby. Now we have the midwife has gone through these things. Now you have a young woman there to give birth to her child.
Então, uma mulher que teve a criança, né? Primeiro fez a criança, concebeu a criança, esperou a criança nasceu. Então, depois, uma outra mulher mais nova que vai ter filho também.
And then we can say, what can the midwife do for the young woman giving birth to the baby? Yes, she has experience. She knew how to make babies, how to carry babies, and to give birth. But she can only give guidelines. She can't make the work for the pregnant woman giving birth to the child. She can't do anything.
Então, a mulher que já teve a experiência de ter o neném, né? Ela conhece como fazer, mas para a outra que vai ter o neném, ela só pode dizer alguma coisa, mas quem vai ter a experiência de ter o neném é a outra pessoa, é a outra mulher.
So if we understand then the flute would be the midwife.
Então, se a gente
The flute asks your question.
o instrumento é a primeira mulher que teve a criança.
And then I continue to conclude, in a sense, the transverse flute plays the flutist. The flute is not playing the flute is playing the player.
Então, entendeu, gente? Na conclusão, assim, a flauta toca a pessoa, né?
And then we have Socrates. Now, in Heidegger's the origin of artwork, 1935-36, is a discussion on what a work of art might be, origins of artwork and craftsmanship.
Então, no Heidegger tem essa discussão, né, do que o que pode ser uma obra de arte, né, a origem da obra de arte, né, e a feição, o fato de fazer a arte, né.
And when studying flautistic craftsmanship, It could, of course, be violin or clarinet or dance, whatever you want.
Quando a gente estuda, né, o
So when,
flautista que faz o instrumento, né,
Yeah.
pode ser qualquer outro instrumento.
so when studying flûtisme as being discussed in principle and rudiments,
É discutido no
as the
princípio,
key text what the whole research process is about, and connected thoughts on expressing music with the traverso could then be connected to Heidegger's thoughts on a painting of a pair of old worn-out shoes painted by Vincent van Gogh in 1886. Yeah, maybe.
What's the page for that?
That's page 4 still.
Huh? I still page for?
Yeah.
Yes, but what the picture is.
That will come later. Very soon.
Okay.
Very soon.
Então, gente, isso aqui que ele tá falando assim, né? Que quando estudando assim a questão da construção do flautista, né? Como é falada, né? No princípio de rudimentos do roteter e conectado, connected thoughts and express music através e conectando com os fatos, que é a expressão da música através do traverso, né? Que pode ser conectado com as ideias do Heidegger, né? Que é um exemplo que o Heidegger fez, né? De uma pintura de um par de sapatos velhos do Van Gogh.
And then, in the English translation of the origin of art, there is a quote. I can read it through completely, and then you translate what's needed. The peasant woman wears her shoes in the field. Here, for the first time, are they, the shoes, what they are. Only then do they become what they are. They are, also the shoes, all the more genuinely so, the less the peasant woman thinks of her shoes while she is working on the field, or even looks at them, or is aware of them in any way at all. This is how the shoes actually serve. It must be in this process of usage that the experimentality of the equipment actually confronts us, and the equipment in this case is a flute, but the example are the shoes from the peasant woman working on the field.
Ok. Então o Heidegger, né, ele discute os sapatos lá na pintura do Van Gogh, né, que a gente vai mostrar agora, né, que é o seguinte, né, uma mulher do campo, né, veste um sapatos enquanto ela trabalha no campo, né. Here for the first time they what they are. Aqui pela primeira vez tá, o que é o sapato é ele mesmo, o que é o sapato, né? On then do they become what they are. Somente dessa forma ele se transforma no que ele é lá no campo enquanto ela usa, né? They are all more genuine. So the present thinks of her shoes while she's working, né? Eles são mais genuínos, né? Enquanto ela usa eles para trabalhar no campo. Eles fazem a função deles, né? Or even looks at them, ou até olha para ele, né? Or is aware of them in any way. E ela tem a noção de que eles existem, né? Ela está consciente dele, né? This is how the shoe serve. É assim que o sapato serve para ela, né? A função do sapato, né? It must be the process of usage of the equipment. É no processo de uso do equipamento, of the equipment, actually confront us. É no processo de uso do equipamento que o próprio equipamento confronta a gente, né? Como é que ele se mostra? Aqui no caso, a flauta ou outro instrumento, né? How the flute shows itself to us.
Exactly, and then we can say, in a sense, that we can replace the shoes with a flute, or a violin, or a car, whatever you want, something we do, a tool.
Yes.
Basically, I think we could go
Uma
back
ferramenta,
to a tool.
né?
A tool that could be many things.
Yes.
And then we can say the tool, when we are digging in the earth like that, shows us a certain functionality.
Yes.
And the flute, in this case, the traversa, shows it wants to be played in a certain way. It does not want to be played in too many ways. And as I used to say to flute students, if they're interested in the traversa, let the traverso show you what it wants. Because if the saying is, this has such a soft sound, the traverso. I said, if you force the traverso, it is like if you go with your dog, or if you can ride horses. If you go with your dog and you force your dog, it will maybe make resistance if you don't break the will of the dog. That's terrible. But if you get along with your dog, it can make some compromise sometimes. Then the dog will follow you, and maybe sometimes you have to wait a little bit to something. Or people that can ride horses, I can't, but I have good friends doing that. If you force the horse don't want to cope with you. And in the worst of cases, they kick you off. And the same with the traverso. If you say to the traverso, please give me a big sound, show me how to do it. You get a huge sound in the traverso. It's not small at all. And I think that is a very good way to show it. And also you don't think, you simply do it. We can imagine it when we have working shoes on to do something. Maybe we think a little bit about them when they're new or something, but then they're simply there. Or when we drive the car, it's the same thing. And that is an important thing we can learn from Heidegger. And the picture of the shoes is Appendix 2. There you can find it. And then we can use a Socratic approach to how to play on the instrument, because we simply ask the instrument, what do you want? Please show me.
Okay.
And I think we all have made the experience. We can force the instrument, but we can also let the instrument open the door for us.
Esse aqui é o sapato. Então, é a própria função do objeto mostrando o que ele é, né? Não o que a gente queria que ele fosse, né? O sapato, no uso do sapato, ele mostra o que ele é. Mesma coisa com o instrumento musical, né? O instrumento musical mostra o que ele é, né? Então, ele está usando o Heidegger aqui para entender o que o traverso, o que a flauta é, né? Entendeu? A funcionalidade, né? Enquanto função, né?
Wow. And then, when I did comment on using Kant or something complicated, philosophical, huge system, here I would say, as a musician, we can be on relatively safe ground. I think we can understand what Heidegger is talking about with these shoes and the functionality of the shoes. You could say with the instruments that what we play. I think that is legitimizes also when I use Heidegger, a great philosopher. But here I can use it.
Yes.
And I think I understand it also fully out. And if it would have been possible, I would have contacted Heidegger and have asked him the question, Herr Heidegger, please give me your answer. You can say completely no if you want, if my interpretation is wrong, but then please tell me. And I'm almost convinced that Heidegger will say, ja, warum nicht? Kann man machen. Das geht. Okay, two last things, and I promise it's finished, because I would like to connect to the concept of tradition with a quote from Gadamer. And you find it on page 5. That's his footnote, note 1.
Yes.
And the idea is for Gadamer, Truth and Method, that hermeneutics must proceed from the assumption that whoever wants to understand is connected to the matter that is discussed in the tradition and has or is gaining a connection to the tradition from which the tradition speaks. Can you translate that?
Então, a hermenêutica deve proceder, né, com a afirmação, né, que a pessoa que quiser entender, né, wants to understand is connected to the matter that is discussed in the tradition, né, tem que entender como é que está conectado com a questão que é conectada com a tradição, né? It has or it's gained a connection to ou que tem uma conexão com a tradição, né? From which the tradition speaks. Da forma como a própria tradição diz. Entendeu? É você entender o objeto. So it's understanding the object from the tradition.
from a given tradition. And the given tradition we can study using Schleiermacher in the process of contextualization when we study historical object, because obviously there is some tradition.
Yes.
But then it's a question to definitions what all this is. And that is what Heidegger said, what Gadamer is saying, that you can't understand completely without knowing the tradition, that knowing the tradition is contextualization of Schleiermacher. So that's it. Now we talked about intellectualizations, and now Proust comes back.
Agora,
Finally.
isso foi de uma forma intelectual, entendeu, né, gente? É você entender o objeto na tradição que ele está inserida e o que a tradição diz para você, né? Mas isso é intelectualização. Mas o Proust traz de uma forma intuitiva.
Exactly. So we can't only trust the intellectualization and
A
analyze.
gente não dá para se fundamentar somente na intelectualização.
And as musicians, we know that there is something that is almost impossible to explain when we play in the orchestra, we play solo, even when we practice. There are certain things that they fall on the right place by themselves.
Yes.
And one could maybe even refuse to intellectualize it.
A gente está falando que a gente sabe disso pela prática musical. Muito do que a gente faz da prática musical não é pela intelectualização.
For example,
É pela intuição. A intuição te fala como é que você faz, ou tocando instrumento, ou fazendo música, né?
For example, when I spoke with one of my very good friends, a great flutist, he's not around us anymore, Alain Marion in France, and we did discuss this phenomenon, and saying this, we came to the conclusion together that we assume that you really like. Yes, I can give an example. You know the Schubert trio in E flat major, the second movement, bop, 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 bidi, dee, dee, da, da, dee, 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 dee. This cello song. How can you find such a tune? You could say, so simple, but so. And we discussed some that we could say, I refuse to say why I like it because I don't know why. I simply like it. I think it's so beautiful. I refuse. I don't think it makes any sense to even try to explain it.
É uma coisa que é tão bonita que te toca de um jeito que você não quer nem saber por que é que você gosta. Você gosta.
You can say the sequence of harmony, the sequence of intervals. That's cold knowledge in a sense.
É conhecimento frio, porque você vai falar,
maybe
sequência harmônica, é isso, é aquilo.
Maybe you could compare that. You know, there are people that they can. When we had telephone catalogs, we don't have them so much anymore. But when they had telephone catalogs, they could learn thousands of telephone numbers by heart. But they didn't know what to say if they would use a telephone number.
Quando tinha catálogo de telefone, tinha pessoas que sabiam assim muitos números, né? Mas não precisava usar aqueles números para nada. Né?
I mean, this tune by Schubert, or we all have tunes that we really like. Why should I intellectualize why I like it? Does it help me that I can give a good theoretical analysis of the progress of harmony? To some extent, maybe, but when it comes to the theme, no. Because when we play music for the listener, for the audience, we are supposed to know a lot about the backbone of musical construction, but the listener are not expected to know all that. They listen to the music. And then finally, we come to Marcel Proust. He comments then on this, and that we leave maybe the French out, but in footnote 2, not only, in the same page 5, footnote 2, not only can intelligence do nothing for us for these resurrections, also regarding finding back to, for example, how to play the flute, when it comes to the deep sense. But also these hours of the past, also how they, for example, played the Traverso in the days of Otteta, but also these hours of the past will only nestle in objects where intelligence has not sought to embody them. As in a sense, this is embodied in the Traverse flute, and this you can only approach intuitively. My research process and work is then, of course, we need super strong theoretical tools and super strong methods. Absolutely, but it comes to a point where this construction doesn't help you. And there we are in the magic country of art, and that explains or legitimizes, in my opinion, why I integrate Marcel Proust.
Entendeu?
Such a great artist.
Assim, que até um certo ponto, a pesquisa dele pode usar esses fundamentos que são fundamentos da intelectualidade, né, do entendimento. Mas chega num determinado ponto, que é da experiência artística, que daí não tem jeito, né? E que daí ele usa um autor que legitimiza que é o curso, né? Que ele usa esse autor que legitimiza ele dizer dessa experiência musical que não passa pelo entendimento. Acho que eu falei claro, né? É difícil de trazer assim, mas é isso.
So that was basically the thing. As you can see, then in the final book, that would be relatively voluminous, 350 pages or so with a long appendix. But
350 páginas.
this is, we can say there is a little text of about 35-40 pages written 1707. But you need this quite robust framework to go into it and trying to eliminate biases based on personal, I don't know what, opinions. They are there, of course, the personal, the subjective thoughts, like DNA, that you can't take away your own DNA. But to fight that also, to put it in a context and using strong tools and not inventing new wheels. That's one of the worst things, I think, when you invent new wheels.
That's how you look to an object through a perspective of research, right?
Yeah. So that's
isso que ele está falando assim, que ele mostrou, né, um trabalho que ficou quase 350 páginas aí, né, que é pegando um documento histórico que tem 35, 40 páginas, né, mas que para realmente ter esse tipo de estudo, você precisa de um assim, né, de um aporte teórico, metodológico muito robusto, né? Você evitar opiniões que não são fundamentadas em nada, nesse tipo de coisa, né? Então, assim, é o olhar, gente, da pesquisa em cima de né? Aí é da pesquisa, é como é que a pesquisa olha uma fonte histórica dessa. Certo? Right?
Yeah, so that's what happens all.
Então é isso, gente. Se tem alguém que fazer alguma pergunta.
Eu teria só uma pergunta, que seria, então, se resumindo, a questão da flauta, da técnica do roteter, que ele desenvolveu, que ele tocava na época, com tudo que ele escreveu, para a técnica utilizada hoje, ela seria considerada uma técnica atual, utilizada hoje?
He's asking, like, what's the relation from what Roteter wrote and the way to play the flute 300 years ago with the modern type of playing? How could actually what Roteter said that back there being used here in the present?
Okay. I will try to answer a question like that. It has different aspects. We can say there are a musical instrument has to obey laws of nature, like the bow, it's certain speed, weight, etc.
As leis da natureza com o instrumento, né?
And if we then break down what is a flute, that is, we have a tube, and inside the tube is an air column.
Tem uma coluna de ar dentro do tubo.
And the air column within the flute corresponds exactly to the string on a guitar or a string instrument. We're talking physics, simply.
Fisicamente, a coluna de ar dentro do tubo corresponde exatamente ao que é uma corda do instrumento.
And the way to make the sound is to make the air column in the instrument or the string on the guitar, violin, whatever, to vibrate.
Então, a forma de fazer o som é você fazer essa coluna de ar ou a corda.
Because without vibration, no sound.
Sem vibração.
We know that. So then the question is, how do we make the vibration? Yes, on a violin or cello, the bow, the hairs of the bow, makes friction, vibration. On the transverse flute, then you simply blow an air stream against the sharp edge. This natural law is exactly the same if it is a flute from the Terre period, if it's a Böhm flute. Today we have luxury instruments of gold, and so if it's a shakuhachi or if it's a recorder. The difference between the recorder and traverse flute is that the recorder does not have the possibility to shape the airstream that is given by the instrument, which is probably one of the reasons why the traverse, some kind of transverse flute, won against the recorder, because we can influence the sound much more. So insofar we can say that is part of the answer in your question. How Haute Terre discusses how to make the air column in the instrument vibrate has strong importance for how we do now, because we do it basically the same way. And then we can get, because but if it's the same, then we don't need to look at it, because we have sources from now. So that could be said. Yes, that's in a way it's true. But we then get another opinion, how it was then made, with a completely different aesthetics of what the instrument should do, a completely different expectation of what it should express and how. Yeah. So, and that is enriching, of course. We can see when we talked about this position normal out in, we use the same technique today, but we perform it differently. We can say that in the period, you kept a more steady position of the embouchure, the lips, so we can say the airstream got the same direction all the time, and you change the position of the target, the sharp edge. We have the instrument in a steady position, so the target doesn't move, but we can focus on the target from with different positions of the lips. So it's enriching, and of course, partly we actually use this. We don't turn so much necessarily, but I don't know if there is a clarinet player around here, so I should not say too much. But sometimes the clarinets, when they play soft, they play so incredibly sharp also. So we have to go a little bit beyond civilized flute technique for the Böhm flute and do some tricks. So insofar as you also see there is a possibility. Also the contrast in what sound production means. We can say one of the central exercises for developing quality of sound is sonfile crescendo diminuendo, violin, whatever. It's the same voice. This is a little bit easier to do on the traverso because it's a more flexible instrument. So if you practice a bit of traverso, then you can take that technique to the Böhm flute. So we can, and also finally, and that's important, that is not only my subjective thoughts. There is an acoustician in Paris, an old lady, she's still alive, Madame Michelle Castellengo. She worked on one of the big universities and had a huge acoustical department, and she was a leader. I have been visiting her, and she made research on transverse flutes, also what we play today and the historical ones. Mm-hmm. And she made research on that in the 1960s and 70s. That's hardcore natural science. And they measure and they do lots of things. And that also confirms the conclusion of her research, which was performed together with outstanding flute players on the traverso and on the Böhm flute of today. The conclusion is that the similarities are far bigger than the differences. There are differences, but the similarities are bigger. And therefore, we can say, yes, it is meaning, it gives meaning to compare this old instrument with it. We can also say that the skills of playing on the flutes we play today enriches, in a sense, the other one. That definitely does. Yes. It depends a little bit what you want to research, what you want to experiment with. But if you have the open mind and tries to follow the thought, I mean, not you, but generally spoken, then definitely it does not hurt to have this extra knowledge. Definitely not.
Vou traduzir assim, né? Que tradução assim, fast. Ou assim, primeiro, o fundamento do instrumento é o mesmo. É um tubo com uma coluna de ar dentro. Então, quando você está tocando a flauta de 300 anos atrás e a de hoje, basicamente, nesse fundamento ela é o mesmo, certo? Ok. Só que esse fundamento, lá 300 anos atrás, ele servia para expressar uma música completamente diferente da que você toca aqui na frente, né? Então, se você vem da perspectiva da flauta de hoje, estudar como é que esse mesmo fundamento era usado para expressar uma outra música lá atrás, pode enriquecer o que você faz com essa aqui de hoje, né? E o contrário também. A daqui enriquece a lá de trás, percebe? Então, assim, pelo fato de ter um denominador comum aí, que é a mesma produção sonora, com esse, mas expressando uma música completamente diferente e usando a técnica para ter um efeito diferente também, esses dois, mas basicamente a mesma técnica. Entendeu? Então, assim, é uma questão simplesmente de enriquecer a prática, né? É isso que o Modesto a gente tem conversado, né, Modesto? Por exemplo, ontem a gente escutou o Padre Zé Maria Xavier sendo tocado numa flauta cônica. O Padre Zé Maria Xavier escreveu para a flauta cônica, que não é essa com uma chave, mas talvez com 5, mas talvez seja essa mesmo, né? Então, a gente toca com o Padre Zé Maria Xavier com a flauta moderna. A gente escutou ontem com uma flauta cônica, que o Padre Zé Maria Xavier, em termos de produção sonora, tinha no Movimento.
É mais similar na época, né?
Mais similar na época, né? A nossa é cilíndrica, a que o Padre Zé Maria Xavier era cônica, né? Escutar essa sonoridade para mim foi um enriquecimento incrível. E entender o Padre Zé Maria Xavier ontem para mim, na minha experiência ali, né? Não sei se
da forma como o Padre Zé Maria escutou a flauta,
exatamente,
né? Que ele compôs.
E aí eu escutei nuances, por exemplo, nuances de dinâmica que você consegue fazer no traverso, que você não consegue fazer na moderna, que apareceram ali quando ele fez ontem. Né? Quando a gente fez a pesquisa do Carlos Batistella com o Beato Sebastiani, nós vimos de cara, e pelos instrumentos que a gente viu, e pelas fotografias na pesquisa do Ademar, que o Padre Zé Maria, e daí pelas outras pesquisas do André Mendes no Rio, de como que a flauta do bembo chega no Brasil e quando, que certamente, e pela data que a flauta do bembo foi criada e que o Padre Zé Maria Xavier fez as composições, é muito claro que ele escreveu para a flauta cônica, né? Só que a gente nunca tinha escutado com a flauta cônica. Ao escutar com a flauta cônica, trouxe uma sonoridade que tem muita idiomatismo com a linguagem do Padre Zé Maria Xavier. Então, assim, a gente pode continuar tocando a flauta cilíndrica? Claro que sim, né? É lindo, é bonito do mesmo jeito. Mas a prática daquele instrumento ali trouxe um enriquecimento do entendimento do Padre Zé Maria Xavier. Para mim, ontem ali, né? Mas a gente
porque ele expande, né?
Ele
possibilidade de recursos, né? De sonoridades, né? De entender o que era, né?
I just connected the fact that you played Padre Zé Maria Xavier yesterday on a conical flute, which was the one he used to in his mind when he wrote, right? So how that enriched like the perception of his music once we listen a different instrument.
Definitely.
Gente, não é legal, né? Gente, agradecemos de coração a presença sua, Andrés. Thank you very much for being here. This was excellent, excellent moment here with you, and so interesting the way you brought to us like your methodological approaches. Né? Eu estou falando com ele assim que é uma palestra incrível, né? Que a gente pode aplicar para o processo que vocês vão passar, que estão passando aqui agora como pesquisadores, né? Muito, muito legal.
Thank you for the attention.
Yep, muito obrigado pela atenção. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm happy to be
back
here.
More.
Yeah, thank you.
Tem que voltar mais.
With pleasure. Cheers.
Aí agora, gente, a gente vai dar um intervalo. Nós temos algumas apresentações que é do Lucas, do Carlos, né? O Ademar não vê ali, será que ele está aí?
Está lá no
Está lá no Serém. E porque a gente precisa agora ter um pouco mais de exemplos das pesquisas que foram feitas aqui no departamento, no âmbito que também